Have you ever been made to feel invisible in a place where you belonged? Imagine stepping onto a plane, holding a valid first-class ticket, only to be ignored, your presence brushed aside, your dignity dismissed while others are treated with courtesy. What would you do? Would you speak up or stay silent, carrying the weight of someone else's assumption about who you are? This is the reality one black woman faced when she sat quietly in her rightful seat. The steward's cold glance, the subtle dismissal, it was more than bad service. It was a wound to her humanity. But what no one around her realized was that she held a power that could change the future of the very airline she was flying. If it were you, how would you respond? With anger, with silence, with grace, or with something greater? Stay with me, because this story isn't just about a flight. It's about choice, dignity, and the moment the world sees who you really are. Before we dive in, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe so more people can journey with us into stories that remind us of the value of respect and the power of quiet strength. The late afternoon sun washed over the glass panels of San Diego International Airport, tinting the entire concourse in a warm orange glow. Travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases, earbuds in, eyes glued to their phones. Among them was a tall, composed black woman in a simple navy dress and a long gray coat. She walked with the kind of calm confidence that came not from arrogance, but from years of learning how to hold her dignity in spaces that did not always offer it back. Her name was Monica Ellis. At that moment, she was just another passenger boarding Aurora Airlines Flight 726 to Chicago O'Hare. At least, that's how it looked to everyone else. No one knew yet that she had been appointed as the airline's new global CEO less than 2 weeks ago. She had chosen to keep her travel discreet, to board without an entourage, to see for herself what the service felt like when no one knew her title. Monica clutched a leather carry-on in one hand, her boarding pass in the other. She approached the first-class lane. Next, called the gate agent, a young man with neat hair and a clipped tone. His name badge read Derek Shaw. Monica handed over her pass with a polite smile. Derek barely glanced at her face. He scanned the ticket, frowned, then looked up as if something didn't add up. Ma'am, this is for seat 2A, first class," he said, his voice slowing, like he was trying to make sure she understood. "Yes," Monica replied simply. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Are you sure this isn't an upgrade? Sometimes the system prints the wrong cabin." Monica didn't flinch. She had heard variations of this before. Wrong line, wrong ticket, wrong assumption. She met his gaze and said, steady as stone, "No mistake. That's my seat." Behind her, a few impatient travelers shifted, sighing loudly. Derek hesitated another beat, then forced a professional smile, as if to cover his suspicion. "All right, enjoy your flight." He handed the boarding pass back with a stiffness that carried more doubt than welcome. Monica walked down the jet bridge, the air cooling around her, the faint smell of metal and fuel lingering. Each step echoed like she was entering not just an airplane, but a stage. Inside the cabin, first-class seats gleamed with cream leather, each one a private pod with crisp white pillows. Passengers were already sipping champagne, unwrapping blankets, flipping through glossy magazines. Their conversations hummed real estate, stocks, last night's game. When Monica reached seat 2A, she slid her carry-on neatly into the overhead bin and sat down. The woman in 2B, a blonde in a pearl cardigan, gave her a once-over, lips pressing into a thin line before turning back to her glass of sparkling wine. No hello, no nod, just dismissal wrapped in silence. Monica unfolded her coat, smoothed it across her lap, and took a slow breath. This wasn't new. Being unseen was part of the air she breathed in rooms like this. Minutes later, a flight attendant glided down the aisle with a tray of drinks, champagne for one man, whiskey for another. She reached Monica's row, glanced briefly, then moved past her without a word. The silence was louder than the engines warming beneath the floor. Monica leaned back against the headrest. She could have spoken up. She could have reminded them that first-class service came with more than just a seat. But she chose quiet, for now. Because sometimes silence wasn't surrender, it was observation, and Monica Ellis, unknown to them, was here to observe everything. As the last boarding calls echoed, another traveler slipped into the row behind her, a young man, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair and a backpack bulging with cables. He settled into his seat, phone in hand, camera lens peeking from the side pocket. His name was Liam Tran, a graduate student in media studies, always on the lookout for stories hidden in plain sight. He noticed the way the attendant skipped Monica. He noticed the stiff body language. He pressed record, quietly. What Liam didn't know, and what no one on this flight could guess, was that the story he was about to capture would shake an entire airline and millions of viewers to their core. For now, though, the engines roared to life, seatbelts clicked, and in 2A, Monica Ellis sat calm and still, invisible in plain sight. The world was about to learn who she really was. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for takeoff. Soft music floated through the speakers, a generic piano track meant to soothe nerves. Monica Ellis sat upright in seat 2A, her coat folded neatly across her lap, her hands resting calmly on top. From the outside, she looked like any other business traveler, self-contained, ready to get through the flight. But to those around her, she was something else, someone out of place. The woman in seat 2B shifted again, clearly uncomfortable. She raised her hand slightly, signaling the flight attendant as if she couldn't wait another second. "Excuse me," she said, her voice crisp and sharp. "I'll have another champagne. And could you bring me the artisan snack box? Please, the one with the olives." The attendant, a tall brunette named Rachel Moore, nodded quickly. Her eyes flicked toward Monica, then away again, as though Monica's presence didn't register as worthy of attention. Rachel moved on, delivering drinks with bright smiles and cheerful small talk to everyone else in the row. Not to Monica. It was so subtle that anyone not paying attention might have missed it. But Monica noticed. She always noticed. Years of navigating boardrooms and negotiations had trained her to catch the smallest shift in tone, the faintest flicker of doubt. Here, in this supposedly premium space, it was happening again, being seen as less, treated as invisible, behind Monica. In row 3, Liam Tran lowered his phone slightly. He wasn't live streaming, just recording casually for his own archive. But even through his small camera lens, he saw the difference. Every other passenger received warmth. Monica received absence. That absence was louder than any insult. As the plane taxied, Rachel came back with a tray of champagne. She bent slightly toward the man across the aisle, seat 2C, placing the glass carefully into his hand. "Here you are, sir. Let me know if you'd like a refill." She offered a smile so wide it showed the dimple in her cheek. Then she straightened, pivoted to walk past Monica again. Monica's eyes followed her for a second, but she didn't speak. She inhaled, exhaled. Her calmness wasn't indifference. It was the deliberate choice of someone who had seen this pattern before and decided not to let it chip away at her spirit. Not yet. From the back of the cabin, a man's laugh broke through the soft hum. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored jacket, a wedding band gleaming on his finger. He leaned toward his seatmate and said in a voice just loud enough to carry forward, "Seems like they're letting anyone up here these days." His companion chuckled, not even pretending to hide it. The words hung in the air, sour and heavy. The woman in 2B smirked, lifting her glass. She didn't respond aloud, but her eyes cut sideways at Monica for just a second before turning back to the bubbles in her flute. Monica shifted in her seat, not to retreat, but to ground herself. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim black notebook. It wasn't for business notes tonight. It was for herself. She flipped to a clean page and began to write in small, neat handwriting. Phrases, fragments, not rebuttals, not anger, just an acknowledgement of what was happening, recorded in her own words. She had started the practice years ago whenever she felt unseen. She wrote it down. The act of putting pen to paper gave her dignity space to breathe. Liam, glancing up from behind, saw the notebook. He couldn't see what she was writing, but the image etched itself into his mind, a woman sitting perfectly composed while the world tried to erase her, and choosing to document it instead of explode. The engines roared as the aircraft turned onto the runway. Seatbelts clinked tighter. Announcements echoed overhead. The vibrations of power filled the cabin as the jet began its climb. Passengers leaned back, some closing their eyes, others scrolling through phones or glancing at screens. Rachel came down the aisle again, this time offering hot towels. She stopped at 1A, leaned forward, and placed the towel delicately into the hands of a middle-aged lawyer-looking type. Then 1B, then 2B. The warm cloth sat neatly in the pearl-adorned woman's lap. When Rachel reached Monica's seat, her eyes flicked to the notebook, then away. She passed on without slowing, without offering. Liam's hand tightened around his phone. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He thought about speaking up, but something in Monica's calm presence held him back. She didn't need saving, not yet. She was letting the story write itself in real time, and Liam realized he was simply the witness with the camera. As the plane leveled off above the clouds, trays clicked open and menus were handed out. Monica was skipped again. The couple across the aisle ordered steak and wine. The woman in 2B ordered salmon with roasted vegetables, reminding Rachel twice to make sure it came with extra lemon. Rachel wrote it down dutifully. When Monica finally looked up from her notebook, she caught Rachel's eyes for a brief second. No hostility, no pleading, just a quiet question written in the stillness. "Do you really not see me?" Rachel blinked, cheeks flushing, and looked away. She moved on down the aisle, pretending not to notice. The cabin settled into its rhythm, clinking glasses, hushed conversations, the soft whir of fans overhead, and through it all, Monica Ellis remained still, pen poised above paper, carrying herself with the quiet strength of someone who knew a larger moment was waiting on the horizon. Because while everyone else in that cabin thought she was invisible, they were about to learn that she was the most visible person on that aircraft. And soon, the entire airline would know it too. The aircraft glided smoothly above the clouds, cabin lights dimmed to a low golden glow. Outside the window, the sky stretched endless, a sea of pale orange fading into indigo. In seat 2A, Monica Ellis closed her notebook and slid it gently into her bag. She wasn't angry, at least not in the explosive way people expected. What she carried instead was something heavier, quieter, an old ache polished by years of repetition. She folded her hands together and let her gaze linger on the horizon beyond the glass. The silence around her wasn't simply absence of sound. It was weight, a silence thick enough that she could feel it pressing against her ribs. Her mind wandered back, uninvited, to moments that looked different but felt the same. She remembered walking into a luxury hotel in New York, luggage in hand, only to have the concierge assume she was there for housekeeping. She remembered the way the man's face had shifted, just slightly, when she handed over her platinum membership card. He had forced a laugh, as though the mistake were nothing. But Monica carried the sting for days. She remembered the time she was invited to a corporate gala. She had been on the panel, the only woman of color at the table. And yet, when she entered the ballroom, someone had placed a valet ticket in her hand. The man had whispered, "The cars are lined up outside, sweetheart." She remembered the shame that flushed her skin, though she hadn't done anything but show up. Even in boardrooms, the comments came wrapped in velvet. "You're so articulate," as if speaking clearly was a surprise. "You're so composed," as if composure was an exotic skill. The words were praise on the surface, but underneath they reminded her of what wasn't expected. And here, on this plane, with its polished wood accents and folded napkins, she felt it again, that stubborn narrative you don't belong. The woman in 2B sipped her champagne noisily, flipping the pages of a glossy magazine. The man across the aisle chuckled with his seatmate, voices low but laced with superiority. Rachel moved between rows with efficiency. Smiles and warmth distributed everywhere but toward Monica. Liam watched from his seat, earbuds dangling unused. He was young, but not blind. He had grown up hearing his mother, a Vietnamese immigrant, talk about the looks she'd get at stores, the way people sometimes checked her change twice, as if she couldn't count. He recognized the pattern now, painted in subtler shades. He kept recording. His phone angled down so no one noticed. Monica straightened, pulling the thin airline blanket from the seat pocket. She shook it once and draped it across her knees. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if she were giving herself the care that had been withheld. Her stillness contrasted sharply with the bustle around her. It was as though she had stepped into a different rhythm, one that didn't depend on the attendant's trays or the passengers' chatter. Rachel passed again, this time delivering menus for dinner service. She placed one gently on the lap of the woman in 2B, another on the tray of 2C, another for 1A and 1B. Then, without a pause, she turned toward the galley, the last menu still tucked under her arm. Liam's jaw clenched. He wanted to stand, to call it out. But when he looked at Monica, she was serene. Her expression was not passive but purposeful. She was watching, recording, not with a phone but with her presence. He realized she was letting the silence speak, letting it fill up until it could no longer be ignored. Dinner orders began. The sound of cutlery, the clink of glass, the rustle of napkins unfolded like choreography. Monica sat unserved, untouched. For a moment, The silence turned heavier. She could feel eyes darting toward her, then away. Passengers aware but unwilling to disrupt their own comfort. She wondered how many of them recognized the wrongness. She wondered how many would replay this later and feel shame for saying nothing. She leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and let herself drift for just a moment into the hum of the engines. The noise there was almost comforting, steady, impartial, unbothered by who sat in which seat. Machines didn't hold bias, people did. A sudden jolt brought her eyes open again. Not turbulence, just the bump of Rachel's cart against her seat. Rachel muttered an apology but didn't look directly at her. Instead, she bent toward the man in 2C with a smile so polished it gleamed. The contrast was unbearable. Liam's thumb hovered over his screen, tempted to upload the video right then. But he waited. Something told him the story wasn't finished. Monica glanced once more out the window. The city lights far below looked like a web of stars stitched across the earth. She thought of all the people moving through those streets, unseen, unheard, dismissed in ways that left no visible mark but bruised the soul just the same. She breathed deeply, slow and steady. This wasn't the moment to reveal herself. Not yet. There would come a time when the silence would be broken, not with anger, but with undeniable truth. For now, she let the quiet stand. In that silence, every neglect became sharper, every slight more visible. She knew the power of letting a story unfold on its own, until even those who tried to look away couldn't deny what was happening before their eyes. As she sat there, hands folded neatly over the thin blanket, the engines hummed, glasses clinked, laughter swelled. But around Monica Ellis, the silence deepened, thick and undeniable. It was only a matter of time before it shattered. The cabin had settled into its mid-flight rhythm. Silverware clinked against porcelain. Low murmurs of conversation hummed between rows, and the faint scent of garlic bread and seared beef filled the air. Monica Ellis sat upright in her seat, the thin airline blanket still resting across her knees. Her notebook remained in her bag, but the weight of it lingered like an anchor in her chest. Rachel Moore moved briskly through the aisle, checking on passengers who had already received their meals. Plates gleamed, wine glasses refilled without request. Then, just as Rachel reached Monica's row again, a shadow loomed over her shoulder. It was Mark Donovan, the purser, tall with a neatly pressed uniform and the kind of practiced smile that hid more than it revealed. He leaned slightly, speaking in a voice pitched to sound polite but carrying an undercurrent of suspicion. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, looking down at Monica as though she had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" The words struck like a blade. Monica tilted her head slowly, meeting his eyes. "Is there a problem?" Her tone was calm, measured, the kind that could cool boiling water. Mark adjusted his tie, shifting his weight from one polished shoe to the other. "Just standard procedure," he said, though his eyes darted to the woman in 2B, who was now listening openly, her magazine forgotten. Sometimes upgrades get printed in error. We want to make sure everyone is in the right seat. The man in 2C smirked, nudging his seatmate as if to say, "See, knew it." Liam Tran's grip tightened around his phone. He lowered it slightly, angling to capture both Monica's composed face and Mark's looming posture. His pulse quickened. This was no longer subtle. This was confrontation, played out in front of a cabin full of silent witnesses. Monica reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the same boarding pass she had handed Derek Shaw at the gate. She placed it in Mark's hand, her movements precise, unhurried. Mark scanned it, his eyes flicking from the pass to Monica's face and back again. The printer ink glowed faintly under the cabin light. Seat 2A. First class. There, Monica said softly, her voice steady as a mountain. It's correct. For a long moment, Mark said nothing. His lips pressed into a thin line. He nodded, finally, handing the pass back. All right, thank you. But the words dripped with reluctance, as though he'd lost a battle he never admitted to fighting. Monica slid the pass back into her pocket. She didn't look at 2B. She didn't look at 2C. She kept her gaze fixed on the seat in front of her, shoulders square, presence unshaken. The silence that followed was deafening. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, aware of the weight of what they had witnessed but unwilling to intervene. Then, from behind, a quiet but distinct click broke the tension Liam saving his video clip. He looked around quickly, heart pounding. No one had noticed. Not yet. Rachel returned moments later with a tray, her professional mask slipping as she spoke. Dinner orders, ma'am, she asked, almost reluctantly, as if forced. Monica's lips curved in the faintest smile. No, thank you. I'll pass. Rachel blinked, confused. She nodded stiffly and turned away. Relief in her hurried steps. But Monica's choice wasn't about the food, it was about control. She had been denied service, doubted publicly, measured against unspoken assumptions, and instead of begging to be served, she chose absence on her own terms, a refusal that was louder than any demand. The woman in 2B shifted again, her discomfort showing now. She sipped her wine too quickly, as if to drown the unease. The man in 2C chuckled under his breath, but his laughter rang hollow, an echo of arrogance that suddenly felt fragile. Mark retreated to the galley, muttering something to Rachel that Liam couldn't catch. But Liam kept his phone ready. He sensed the tide turning. Monica leaned back, her eyes closed for a brief moment. She didn't need to speak yet. The silence was working for her, each neglect and each doubt weaving together into a story that no one could deny once it came to light. The aircraft continued slicing through the night sky. Engines steady, lights glowing faintly above each row. But inside the cabin, unease began to ripple. The passengers knew they had seen something wrong. The crew knew they had crossed a line, and Monica Ellis knew the weight of truth was gathering, preparing for the moment it would break wide open. Her seat remained the same, her posture unchanged. But everything else in that cabin was beginning to shift, imperceptibly, toward the reckoning that waited just ahead. The seatbelt sign flickered off with a faint chime. Passengers shifted in their chairs, stretching their legs, adjusting pillows, settling into the long flight east. Flight attendants rolled carts down the aisle, the soft clatter of glasses and plates blending with the drone of the engines. The first-class cabin glowed under dimmed lights, a cocoon of supposed comfort. Yet, for Monica Ellis, comfort was an illusion. Rachel Moore moved briskly between rows, balancing trays with practiced ease. She placed a plate of steak in front of the man in 2C, his grin widening as he cut into the meat with exaggerated flourish. She set a delicate salmon dish before the woman in 2B, who adjusted her pearls and dabbed her lips with a napkin before lifting her fork. Not once did Rachel pause at 2A. The absence was no longer subtle. It was glaring. Monica kept her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture impeccable, as if the silence itself were a test she had chosen to endure. She watched Rachel move past again, tray empty now, a practiced smile plastered across her face. The woman in 2B leaned slightly, her voice pitched just loud enough to be heard across the row. "People like you should be grateful just to sit here," she said, almost casually, as though it were an observation rather than an insult. Her eyes lingered on Monica's coat, her simple dress, her bare neck without jewelry. The words hung in the air, bitter and heavy. Monica turned her head slowly, meeting the woman's gaze with quiet composure. She didn't reply. Her silence was more cutting than any argument could have been. She turned back toward the window, letting the reflection of her face against the glass remind her of who she was, not invisible, not misplaced, but standing firmly in her own truth. Behind her. Liam Tran's phone recorded the moment. His heart pounded as he caught the woman's sneer, Rachel's indifference, Monica's dignified quiet. He whispered under his breath, "This is unreal." Though no one heard him, he knew what his lens was capturing, not just an incident, but a pattern, one that millions online would soon recognize in their own lives. Mark Donovan emerged again from the galley, his brow furrowed, eyes scanning the cabin. He seemed unsettled now, less certain of his authority, but unwilling to admit it. He approached Rachel, whispering low. Rachel nodded stiffly, then turned to fuss over 1A, pouring a generous glass of wine as if to bury her unease under service elsewhere. Monica shifted slightly, drawing the thin blanket closer around her legs. She didn't need their food or their smiles. What she needed, what she had always needed, was recognition, not for her title, not for her wealth, but for her humanity. The engines hummed steadily, trays clattered, conversations dipped and rose, but around Monica, the silence had become a wall, thicker with each neglect, each careless word. The man in 2C leaned back, smirking as he wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Guess first class isn't what it used to be," he muttered. His seatmate laughed, shaking his head as though Monica's mere presence was proof of decline. Liam caught it all. He shifted in his seat, debating whether to intervene, to stand up and call out what was happening. But then he looked at Monica again, calm, centered, unshaken. Something in her presence told him to wait. This wasn't the end of the story. She wasn't done. Monica closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the steady hum of the engines. She thought of her grandmother, who used to say, "Sometimes the quietest strength shakes the loudest walls." The words steadied her now. She had no need to prove herself to the people in these rows, but soon they would see. She opened her eyes again, gaze steady, hands still folded. She wasn't invisible, no matter how hard they tried to make her so. She was a storm contained, waiting for the right moment to break. In the galley, Rachel busied herself with coffee service, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged cups on the tray. She felt the weight of what she had ignored, though she wouldn't name it yet. Mark's eyes lingered on her, pressing unspoken orders to keep things under control. But control was already slipping, thread by thread. As the silence grew louder than their smiles, the woman in 2B glanced again at Monica, this time less certain. Her fork clinked against the plate, a small tremor betraying her unease. She turned back to her meal quickly, chewing too fast, as if to escape her own words. The night deepened outside. Stars scattered like shards of glass across the sky. The plane sliced through the darkness, steady and relentless, and in seat 2A, Monica Ellis remained still, a quiet force holding her ground in the face of everything designed to erase her. Her silence was not weakness, it was preparation, because soon, very soon, silence would no longer be enough. The hours in the sky seemed to stretch longer than usual, the hum of the engines constant, the service flowing easily around everyone except the woman in seat 2A. Monica Ellis sat motionless, her calm presence drawing invisible lines in the air. She had been ignored, doubted, and insulted. Yet she remained steady. The cabin around her carried on as though her existence was a mistake, an anomaly in their curated bubble of privilege. But storms, when quiet, are only gathering strength. Mark Donovan emerged again from the galley, shoulders squared, jaw tight. His tone was clipped, rehearsed in the way of someone trying to reassert control. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, addressing the first-class cabin, "I'll be walking through to ensure all passengers are properly accommodated. If anyone has issues, please let us know now." His eyes flicked toward Monica as though daring her to speak. Monica didn't move. Rachel followed him closely, holding a tray of empty glasses. Her steps faltered slightly as she passed 2A. Guilt etched faintly across her face. She opened her mouth to speak but caught Mark's glance and shut it again. The man in 2C chuckled under his breath. "Guess they're finally sorting it out," he whispered to his seatmate. It was then that the cockpit door clicked open. The sound drew attention immediately. Passengers rarely saw the captain mid-flight. Out stepped Captain James O'Connor, tall, silver-haired, with the composed stride of someone used to command. He moved down the aisle, pausing briefly to greet passengers in 1A and 1B. His smile was easy, practiced, the kind meant to reassure. When he reached row 2, his eyes fell on Monica. For a moment, the composure slipped. He froze. Then, with a suddenness that startled the cabin, his expression shifted not to suspicion, not to dismissal, but to recognition. "Good evening, Ms. Ellis," he said warmly, voice carrying just enough for nearby passengers to hear. Then, louder, with unmistakable respect, or should I say, "Madam CEO." The words sliced through the cabin like a lightning strike. Rachel's tray trembled, glassware rattling softly. Mark's eyes widened, his mouth parting as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. The woman in 2B gasped, her pearl-clad hand flying to her chest. The man in 2C choked on his drink, sputtering into his napkin. Liam's phone caught it all, the captain's greeting, the ripple of shock, Monica's still, calm face. His heart raced as he realized the story had just twisted into something far bigger than a simple act of prejudice. Monica didn't rise, didn't bask in the moment. She simply inclined her head slightly toward O'Connor, acknowledging him with the dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove. Captain O'Connor straightened, addressing Mark and Rachel directly now. His tone carried the weight of command. "I trust the new CEO of Aurora Airlines has been treated with the respect she deserves." The silence that followed was louder than the engines. Rachel's lips trembled. Words stuck in her throat. Mark fumbled, glancing around for support, but found none. Passengers shifted uneasily, shame washing over some faces, disbelief over others. The woman in 2B turned pale, gripping her wineglass too tightly. The man in 2C stared at Monica like she had transformed before his eyes, though she was the same woman she had been when she boarded. The only difference now was that her title was known. O'Connor gave a firm nod to Monica, his tone steady. "We're honored to have you with us tonight, ma'am." He turned to return to the cockpit, leaving behind a cabin drenched in silence and unease. Rachel finally stammered. Ms. Ellis, I apologize. I didn't realize Monica's eyes met hers. Calm, but unyielding. Didn't realize what the question was soft, but it carried a blade's edge. Rachel swallowed hard, unable to answer. Mark cleared his throat, voice cracking slightly. "Of course, Ms. Ellis, if there's anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable." But Monica raised her hand, silencing him without a word. The woman in 2B shifted in her seat, cheeks burning with shame. She whispered something under her breath, perhaps an apology, though too faint to be heard clearly. The man in 2C busied himself with his napkin, suddenly fascinated by the condensation on his glass. Liam could hardly breathe. His video had captured the twist no one in the cabin had expected. The woman they had dismissed, doubted, and insulted was not just another passenger, she was their leader, the head of the airline itself. Monica leaned back in her seat, hands folded once more across her lap. The silence that had weighed so heavily on her before now worked in her favor. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth had spoken louder than she ever could. But this was only the beginning. The cabin settled into a tense quiet after Captain O'Connor returned to the cockpit. It was the kind of silence that followed thunder, the air heavy, charged, as though everyone waited for something else to crash down. Monica Ellis remained seated, hands folded neatly in her lap, gaze steady out the window. Below, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, silver in the moonlight. Inside, however, every passenger seemed suddenly aware of themselves, how they were sitting, what they had said, whether they had laughed or stayed silent earlier. Guilt was thick in the air, though no one dared to name it. Rachel Moore stood frozen at the front of the cabin, her face pale. The weight of realization pressed hard on her shoulders. She remembered every glance she had avoided giving Monica, every glass of champagne she hadn't offered, every small dismissal disguised as just following procedure. And now she realized all of it had been seen, not just by the new CEO, but by an entire cabin full of witnesses. Mark Donovan's composure was cracking. He tried to retreat into the role of professional, moving briskly down the aisle, but his hands trembled. He asked 1A if they needed anything, then 1B, but his voice faltered, his tone betraying the fear curling in his gut. He had built a career on control, on putting passengers in their place when they stepped out of line, but now he was the one exposed. The woman in 2B shifted uncomfortably, pearl necklace rising and falling with her unsteady breath. She avoided Monica's eyes, though guilt pressed against her chest like a weight. She had spoken her prejudice so casually, so confidently, assuming safety in her superiority. Now she was forced to confront the fact that the person she dismissed was her superior in every sense of the word. Liam Tran's heart raced as he reviewed his footage discreetly. The phone angled against his tray table. Every second was there the condescension, the dismissal, the captain's respectful reveal. His instincts told him this video would explode if it left the cabin. But for now, he held it quietly, waiting, unsure if releasing it was his decision to make. Rachel finally forced herself forward, approaching Monica's seat. Her voice shook. "Ms. Ellis, I need to apologize. I made assumptions I shouldn't have. It was wrong." Monica turned her gaze from the window, fixing Rachel with eyes that were calm yet unyielding. "You didn't just make assumptions, Rachel," she said softly, her voice carrying to the nearby rows. "You acted on them. You treated me as though I didn't belong. That choice came from somewhere." Rachel's throat tightened. She wanted to say she hadn't meant harm, that she was tired, that the shift was long, but the words felt hollow, cowardly. She nodded slowly, swallowing the excuses that burned her tongue. "You're right," she whispered. "I did." Mark stepped in quickly, trying to salvage control. "Ms. Ellis, please, let us ensure the rest of your flight is comfortable." Monica tilted her head slightly, regarding him. "Comfort isn't what I asked for," she replied evenly. "Respect was." Her words landed with precision, sharp enough to draw the truth out of everyone listening. Passengers shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. For some, shame prickled hot on their skin. For others, a subtle admiration bloomed admiration for her composure, for the way she handled power without cruelty. The man in 2C, who had laughed earlier, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ms. Ellis, I owe you an apology as well," he muttered. His voice was lower now, humbled. "I shouldn't have made assumptions either." The woman in 2B pressed her hands together tightly, lips trembling. I spoke out of ignorance," she admitted, voice cracking. "I shouldn't have said what I said." Monica looked between them. She didn't offer immediate forgiveness. Instead, she allowed the silence to stretch, forcing them to sit in their discomfort. Then she nodded slightly, not as absolution, but as acknowledgement. Rachel took a shaky breath. "If you give me the chance, I want to learn from this, to be better." For the first time, Monica's expression softened just slightly. "That's where change begins," she said quietly, "not with apologies, but with choices. I'll be watching." Her words were not a threat, but a promise, one that hung in the air heavier than anger ever could. Liam watched it all unfold, his chest tight with emotion. It wasn't just the revelation of Monica's position that struck him. It was the way she carried herself, the way she forced people to confront the truth without raising her voice. She embodied something deeper than authority. She embodied dignity. As the plane glided through the night, the cabin shifted subtly. Service became more attentive, not in the performative way of overcompensation, but in genuine attempts to correct what had gone wrong. Passengers spoke in quieter tones, more careful with their words. The imbalance of power that had once been so stark now felt fragile, reshaped by truth. But beneath it all, a tension remained. The revelation had changed the atmosphere, but it hadn't yet reached resolution. Monica's presence was no longer ignored, but the question lingered. What would she do with what had just unfolded? Rachel returned to the galley, her hands trembling as she poured water into glasses. Mark pulled her aside, his voice low and sharp. "Don't humiliate yourself more than you already have," he hissed. "Play it smart." Rachel looked at him, something new flickering in her eyes. "Playing it smart is what got us here," she whispered back. "Maybe it's time to play it honest." Mark's jaw tightened, his facade of authority thinning. He turned away, muttering under his breath, but Rachel stood taller than before. Back in 2A. Monica closed her eyes briefly, letting the hum of the engines wash over her. She wasn't naive. She knew this was only the first step. Respect earned in the cabin didn't erase the culture that had allowed the disrespect in the first place. Change would take more than a single confrontation. But for now, she had planted the seed. The rest of the flight moved forward in uneasy quiet. But Monica remained the still point in the storm. She had endured, she had revealed, and now she waited. The true reckoning, she knew, would come after landing. The long overnight flight moved steadily eastward, but the atmosphere in first class felt anything but steady. Passengers whispered behind half-raised hands, stealing glances toward Monica Ellis as though she were a mirror reflecting their shame. The revelation still rippled through them the woman they had ignored, belittled, doubted she was the CEO, the one with the power to shape the airline's future. Rachel Moore lingered in the galley, fingers drumming against a metal counter. Every time she replayed her actions, her chest tightened. She had ignored Monica's request for water, skipped her row during service, looked at her like she was out of place. And all the while, Monica had sat silently, absorbing it. Rachel whispered under her breath, "What was I thinking?" But she knew the answer. She hadn't been thinking at all. She had been assuming. Mark Donovan was less reflective. He paced back and forth like a caged man, muttering frustrations. "She set us up," he hissed once to Rachel. "She sat there waiting for this. She wanted us to fail." Rachel looked at him, startled. "She didn't want us to fail. We did that ourselves." Mark's eyes hardened. "Speak for yourself. I've been doing this job for 20 years. No one's ever accused me of being unfair." Rachel almost laughed bitter, disbelieving. "Then maybe you weren't paying attention." Meanwhile, Monica remained still in seat 2A, the quiet center of a shifting storm. Liam Tran couldn't take his eyes off her. He had studied leadership in graduate school, read case studies on influence and authority, but nothing compared to this, a leader whose power wasn't in shouting orders, but in holding silence until the truth rose to meet her. When the cabin lights dimmed for rest, most passengers reclined, though few could truly sleep. The weight of what had happened pressed heavily on them. At around 3 a.m., turbulence rattled the plane, a shudder that sent glasses clinking. Passengers stirred awake. Mark took the chance to approach Monica under the cover of dim light. He crouched slightly beside her seat, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Ellis," he whispered, "let's be reasonable. Tonight has been unusual. I hope you won't let one misunderstanding cloud your judgment of this crew." Monica turned her gaze toward him, steady as ever. "A misunderstanding," she repeated slowly, tasting the word. "Is that what you call it?" Mark's smile faltered. "We're only human. We make mistakes. Surely you don't intend to make an example of us?" Monica's voice stayed soft, but every word landed with precision. "Mark, you made a choice, more than once. When you questioned my place here, when you silenced Rachel, when you smirked at me instead of serving me like every other passenger. That wasn't a mistake. That was a pattern." Mark's jaw tightened. "And what about the passengers? Are you going to punish them too?" Monica leaned forward slightly, her voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut. "They are not under my command. You are." The words hit like a strike. Mark stood too quickly, knocking his knee against the armrest. He muttered something under his breath and walked briskly back to the galley. Face flushed. Rachel had watched the exchange from a distance, heart pounding. She realized then that Monica wasn't cruel, wasn't vengeful. She was precise. She didn't exaggerate or humiliate. She simply held up the truth like a mirror. By dawn, the first light painted the horizon pink. The captain announced they would begin their descent soon. Passengers began to stir, gathering their belongings, but the tension lingered like fog. As the plane descended, Monica rose from her seat for the first time. Her presence filled the narrow aisle. She stood calmly at the front of the cabin, her voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "I want to thank you all for this flight," she began. "It has been revealing, not just for me, but I hope for all of you." Passengers froze, listening. Mark's face tightened. Rachel looked down at her shoes. The woman in 2B clutched her pearls like armor. Monica continued. "Bias does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the form of doubt, dismissal, or silence. Tonight, I experienced that firsthand, not as your CEO, but as a passenger, and it mattered." Her words pierced the air, raw and undeniable. Liam's camera captured every moment. "Leadership," Monica said, pausing briefly, "is not about titles or uniforms. It is about how we treat those we think cannot answer back. And every one of you had a choice last night. Some chose silence. Some chose mockery. Some chose to ignore." She let her gaze sweep across the cabin, not accusing, but not sparing them either. Rachel's cheeks burned hot. The woman in 2B shifted uncomfortably, the pearls around her neck suddenly heavy. The man in 2C swallowed hard, his earlier arrogance gone. Monica let the silence hang, then said, "But it is never too late to choose differently." The engines roared louder as the plane cut through clouds, preparing for landing. Her voice, calm and unwavering, was the only thing passengers could hear clearly. "When we land, you will walk away from this flight. But I ask that you carry this with you. Respect must not depend on recognition. Dignity should not require proof." Rachel felt her eyes sting. Mark's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. Liam's hands trembled as he held the phone steady, realizing he was capturing something bigger than any viral clip he was capturing, a moment that demanded reflection. The seatbelt sign chimed. Monica returned to her seat, fastening her belt with the same composure she had shown all night. The plane began its final descent, the city lights below glowing like scattered stars. Everyone knew, though no one said it aloud, this landing would not just be physical. It would be the start of a reckoning. The wheels of the aircraft struck the runway with a jolt that shivered through the cabin. Dawn light spilled across the windows, painting every face in shades of gold and gray. Passengers exhaled with relief, but the tension from the night still clung like static. Monica Ellis sat motionless in 2A, her seatbelt snug across her lap, her eyes steady as the cityscape of London spread out below. The landing roll slowed, brakes hissing, engines roaring down to a murmur. The familiar announcement crackled over the intercom, Captain James O'Connor thanking everyone for choosing Aurora Airlines, instructing them to remain seated until the plane reached the gate. But his voice carried a subtle gravity, as though he too felt the weight of what had unfolded. Rachel Moore stood frozen at the galley, hands clasped tightly. She had practiced countless cheerful farewells over her career, but none came to her lips now. Her mind replayed the night in agonizing fragments the glass of water withheld, the dismissive tone, the way she had looked past Monica as if she were invisible. Every piece cut sharper than the last. Mark Donovan straightened his tie, the gesture mechanical, an attempt to salvage dignity. But the stiffness of his movements betrayed him. His thoughts churned. Would she fire him? Would his career end on this morning? After 20 years, he muttered to himself. She wouldn't dare make a spectacle here. Yet, even as he said it, he didn't believe his own words. Liam Tran angled his phone low, recording the moment without drawing attention. His heart thumped in rhythm with the taxiing wheels. He knew what he held in his hands, not just a viral video, but proof of something deeper. He could feel the moral weight pressing down should he release it. Or was it Monica's story to tell? The plane eased into the gate, the jet bridge crawling into place. A chime signaled that passengers could unbuckle. The usual rustle of movement filled the cabin, but it was subdued, hesitant. The woman in 2B gathered her designer purse, her pearl necklace trembling against her chest. She avoided looking toward 2A. The man in 2C reached for his jacket, but his hands shook as he tried to slip it on. Their arrogance had dissolved, leaving only awkward silence. Then Monica rose, slowly, deliberately. The motion drew every eye in the cabin. She adjusted her blazer, smooth and precise, then turned to face the aisle. Her presence was quiet, yet it filled the space like no announcement could. Rachel took a shaky step forward. "Ms. Ellis, if I could." But Monica lifted her hand gently, stopping her. "Not here," she said softly. "This is not the place for your apology. Words are easy at the gate. What matters is what you do when no one is watching." Rachel swallowed hard, nodding, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Mark bristled, unable to stay silent. "With all due respect, Ms. Ellis," he said quickly, his tone clipped. "We've all had a long night. Perhaps it would be best if we discussed this privately, away from passengers and cameras." Monica turned her gaze on him, calm but piercing. "Privacy is what allows behavior like yours to continue unchecked," she replied. "Transparency is where accountability begins." Mark flinched, his face coloring. He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when he saw passengers watching intently, their expressions ranging from shame to admiration. The seatbelt sign chimed again, and the cabin door swung open. A uniformed ground agent stepped aboard, scanning the first-class cabin with brisk efficiency until her eyes landed on Monica. Her expression shifted instantly, brightening with recognition. "Ms. Ellis, welcome to London," she said warmly. "We've been expecting you." A murmur swept through the passengers, expecting her. The confirmation left no room for doubt. Monica gave the agent a polite nod. "Thank you. I'll disembark shortly." Rachel lowered her gaze. Mark clenched his fists. The woman in 2B bit her lip, her earlier cruelty echoing in her ears. The man in 2C glanced away, unable to meet Monica's eyes. Liam's camera caught every second, but he found himself trembling not with excitement, but with awe. This wasn't just a story anymore, it was a mirror. As passengers began filing out, Monica remained standing at the front, her presence forcing each one to pass her. The effect was deliberate. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence made them confront themselves. The woman in 2B paused briefly, her lips trembling. "Ms. Ellis," she whispered. "I was wrong." Monica inclined her head slightly, her voice steady. "Remember that when you meet someone without a title." The man in 2C muttered a quick, "Sorry," before hurrying down the aisle. His steps were quick, almost frantic, as though fleeing from the weight of his own reflection. Rachel was the last to leave among the crew, her shoulders heavy. She stopped beside Monica, eyes brimming with regret. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she whispered. Monica looked at her closely, not unkindly. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give. Rachel, it's yours to earn. Decide who you want to be after this." Rachel nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks before stepping aside. Mark lingered, refusing to move. His voice was low, bitter. "You'll ruin good people's careers over one night. Think carefully about what that says about you." Monica's expression didn't change. "I'm not ruining careers. Mark, I'm revealing character. What you do from here will say everything about you." Her words cut deep. Mark turned abruptly and stormed off the plane, his footsteps heavy against the jet bridge. Monica finally stepped into the aisle, walking with unhurried grace. Passengers and crew alike made way for her. The ground agent escorted her toward the terminal, her presence like a shield against the storm she had just endured. Liam remained in his seat, phone in hand, his heart racing. He whispered to himself, "The world needs to see this." Yet he hesitated, knowing the choice wasn't his alone. As Monica disappeared into the jet bridge, the cabin was left in silence. Those who remained felt as though they had been part of something larger than themselves, a moment that would not fade with landing. The city outside bustled with its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet reckoning that had unfolded thousands of feet above. But soon, the story would not stay contained within the walls of one aircraft. Soon, the world would know. The terminal at Heathrow was alive with the usual morning bustle announcements echoing over loudspeakers, rolling suitcases rattling across tile, travelers rushing between gates. Yet, when Monica Ellis stepped through the jet bridge, accompanied by the ground agent, the air around her seemed to shift. Conversations faltered. People noticed her without knowing why, drawn by her quiet poise, the way she walked with calm assurance, unhurried amid the rush. Rachel Moore trailed several paces behind, clutching her bag like a lifeline. Her uniform, once a symbol of professionalism, now felt like a costume she no longer deserved to wear. She could barely lift her eyes. Every sound of footsteps around her reminded her of the passengers who had seen her fail. Mark Donovan moved briskly, trying to stay ahead. His jaw was tight, his phone clutched in one hand. He was already drafting messages, calling in favors, convincing himself that if he told the story first, maybe he could shape it. "She's new," he muttered under his breath. "She won't risk a scandal this early. I'll spin it." But deep down, a crack of doubt split his certainty. Liam Tran slipped into the flow of passengers but kept Monica in view. His phone battery flashed low, but he still held it steady, recording snippets. He had posted nothing yet. Instead, he was listening, observing. He felt a strange responsibility. This wasn't just about views or followers. This was about truth, about dignity. At the security exit, a cluster of Aurora Airlines executives waited. Their polished suits and tense expressions betrayed that they had been briefed. The regional director, Anthony Wells, stepped forward, smiling with too much eagerness. "Ms. Ellis, welcome. We've arranged a private lounge." Monica raised her hand gently, stopping him. "No lounge, not yet. There are things to address first." Anthony hesitated, glancing nervously at the small crowd forming nearby. Passengers from the flight whispered, some pointing discreetly. The woman from 2B lingered behind, her pearls now hidden under her coat collar. The man from 2C stood at a distance, avoiding Monica's gaze. Their shame followed them like shadows. Monica turned, her voice carrying with calm authority. Before we move forward, I need to be clear. Last night was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of something deeper. And, as of this morning, Aurora Airlines will no longer look away. Her words stilled the terminal. Even the overhead announcement seemed to fade into the background. People leaned in, sensing something important was unfolding. Mark forced a laugh, stepping forward. With all due respect, Ms. Ellis, one difficult flight hardly defines the culture of this airline. Monica's gaze fixed on him, sharp and steady. You're right, Mark. One flight doesn't define a culture, but it reveals it. And what I saw last night is what too many of our passengers have lived for far too long. Rachel's chest tightened. She wanted to melt into the floor, yet she couldn't look away. Monica's voice wasn't raised, but it filled the space like a steady drumbeat of truth. Anthony shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting. No. Monica interrupted softly but firmly. Accountability belongs in the open. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Liam raised his phone slightly higher. His camera caught the subtle expressions, the flicker of guilt on Rachel's face, the flush of anger on Mark's, the steady resolve in Monica's eyes. Monica drew a breath, then continued. I sat in 2A as a passenger. I asked for nothing more than to be treated like anyone else. Instead, I was ignored, dismissed, and questioned as if I did not belong. That is not service. That is bias. And it ends today. Gasps sounded among passengers who had gathered nearby. Some nodded, their own experiences reflected in her words. A woman in the crowd whispered, "That happened to me too." Another murmured. Finally, someone saying it. Rachel stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Ms. Ellis, I failed you. I failed our passengers, and I'm ashamed of it." Her words cracked under the weight of truth. "If you let me, I want to learn. I want to be better." Monica's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "Rachel, your honesty matters, but change isn't proven in apologies. It's proven in what you choose after this moment." Rachel nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She knew these weren't empty words. This was a line drawn. Mark scoffed, unable to contain himself. "So what then? You'll fire us all on your first day, make a spectacle of us to prove a point." Monica regarded him quietly for a long moment. The silence grew thick until finally she spoke. "I don't make spectacles. Mark, I make change. You'll have your hearing with HR, and your record will speak louder than any defense you attempt. Transparency isn't punishment, it's justice." Mark's face flushed crimson. He turned sharply, storming away toward a cluster of uniformed crew, muttering curses under his breath. Anthony Wells stepped closer, lowering his voice, though everyone could still hear. "Ms. Ellis, the board will want a full report. They may not appreciate such public measures." Monica's reply was calm, steady. "Then they will learn what passengers have always known. Dignity is not negotiable." The terminal erupted in quiet applause, tentative at first, then stronger. Passengers clapped, strangers who had no stake in the company but every stake in the truth she had spoken. The sound rolled across the polished floors, soft yet powerful. Liam lowered his phone, chest tight with emotion. He whispered to himself, "This is history." He knew the video, once shared, would ripple far beyond Heathrow. Monica acknowledged the applause with a small nod, her eyes scanning the crowd. She saw not just faces, but stories, people who had endured silence, who had been treated as invisible, who now felt seen. She turned back to her executives. "We'll begin immediate reforms. Training will no longer be a box to check. It will be immersive, accountable, and transparent. Complaints will not vanish into files. They will be answered. And every member of this airline, from crew to board, will understand this truth-respect is not a courtesy. It is the minimum." Anthony swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, Miss Ellis." Rachel stood silently, tears drying on her cheeks, a seed of determination forming inside her. She wasn't absolved, but she had been given a choice, and she would not waste it. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispers echoing. "She's different. She means it." Finally, Monica exhaled, steady but tired. The battle was only beginning. She knew resistance would come from the board, from unions, from those invested in the old ways. But she also knew the tide had turned. For the first time that night and morning, she allowed herself a small smile. The reckoning had begun. The clapping in the terminal faded into scattered murmurs, but the energy remained electric. Travelers pulled out their phones, some discreet, others bold, recording Monica Ellis as though she were a head of state, rather than the new CEO of Aurora Airlines. She walked steadily toward the arrival hall, accompanied by Anthony Wells and 2 assistants. Her presence quiet but commanding. By the time she reached the baggage area, cameras had begun to gather, first from curious passengers, then from local reporters who had caught wind of whispers on social media. Liam Tran, standing on the edge of the crowd, noticed his phone buzz relentlessly. His short clips, uploaded moments earlier, were already spreading. Notifications flooded in shares, comments, news outlets requesting permission to use his footage. The story was breaking faster than he had imagined. Rachel Moore lingered by a support column, her bag slung over her shoulder. She watched the scene unfold with a mixture of dread and relief. This was no longer just between her and Monica. The world was watching now, and maybe that was the only way real change could happen. Mark Donovan, however, was not ready to concede. He had slipped away earlier, but now reappeared near the carousel. His phone pressed tightly to his ear. His voice was low, hurried, filled with frustration. "She's grandstanding in the terminal," he hissed into the receiver. "If this hits the board before we can frame it, we're finished. Get someone to control the narrative, spin it as her first-day stunt." He ended the call with a sharp jab of his thumb, his eyes darting nervously as he spotted reporters clustering around Monica. Flashes burst across the terminal. A reporter from the BBC thrust a microphone forward. "Ms. Ellis, is it true you were subjected to discrimination on one of your own flights?" Monica paused, her expression calm, her voice even. "It's true that what happened last night was not about service. It was about assumption. And assumptions, when left unchecked, become barriers. I sat as a passenger, and I was treated as though I did not belong." The crowd stilled, the weight of her words pressing against the air. Cameras clicked, microphones tilted closer. Another reporter from CNN called out, "Will there be consequences for the crew involved?" Monica met the reporter's eyes. "Consequences are inevitable when choices are made. But my focus is larger than individuals. This is about culture. Accountability will be transparent. But reform is the goal. Aurora Airlines will be a place where dignity is non-negotiable." Liam's phone buzzed again. His footage had just been shared by a major outlet. Comments scrolled faster than he could read. Finally, someone said it. Leadership at its finest. This woman is changing the industry. His chest tightened. He realized he wasn't just documenting a story, he was witnessing the beginning of a movement. Rachel inched closer, though she stayed at the edge of the crowd. She listened to Monica's voice steady the chaos, turning what could have been a scandal into a call for reflection. She whispered to herself, "She's not tearing us down. She's trying to rebuild." The thought stirred something fragile but real, a spark of hope. Mark, however, bristled. He shoved his phone into his pocket, his thoughts a storm. He could already picture the headlines CEO shames crew, airline in turmoil. He muttered bitterly, "She doesn't know the damage she's causing." But deep down, another voice whispered back, "Or maybe she knows exactly what she's doing." The woman from 2B stood nearby, pearls tucked away, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. She had thought her words on the plane were just whispers, gone into the air. But now, hearing Monica speak publicly, she felt exposed, as though everyone could see her shame. She pulled her coat tighter, eyes down, hoping anonymity would swallow her whole. The man from 2C leaned against a pillar, jaw clenched. He had mocked, he had laughed, and now he was watching the ripple of his behavior magnified across cameras and microphones. For the first time in years, he felt the burn of humiliation not as a weapon he wielded, but as one turned back on himself. Anthony Wells tried to interject, his voice nervous. "Ms. Ellis, perhaps we should move to the lounge for the scheduled press briefing." Monica shook her head, her tone calm but resolute. "The truth does not belong in closed rooms. Anthony, it belongs where it can be heard." The crowd applauded softly, hesitant at first, then stronger. Travelers from other flights, who knew nothing of the details, found themselves clapping simply because they recognized integrity when they saw it. Rachel pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. Liam's camera caught her face in that moment, not as the attendant who had failed, but as a woman on the cusp of change. He wondered if her story, too, would one day matter. As Monica concluded her brief remarks, she offered a final line that silenced the chatter. An airline is not measured only by its planes or its profits. It is measured by how it treats people when no one is watching. Last night, people were watching, and today, we begin again. The words settled like a promise. Reporters shouted more questions, but Monica moved forward, guided by her own steady pace, leaving sound bites and headlines in her wake. She wasn't running from the storm, she was walking directly into it, reshaping it with each step. Liam lowered his phone, his hands trembling. He whispered, "This isn't just viral, this is history in motion." The ride from Heathrow to Aurora Airlines' London headquarters was quiet, but the silence carried weight. Monica Ellis sat in the back of a sleek black sedan, the skyline rising ahead. She glanced at her reflection in the tinted glass calm eyes, steady breath, the same woman who had been dismissed in 2A hours earlier. The difference now was that the world knew her name. Anthony Wells sat opposite, fidgeting with his cufflinks. His attempts to keep control at the airport had been brushed aside, and he knew the board would be bracing for confrontation. "The directors will be cautious," he said finally, voice clipped. "They're worried about brand stability. They don't want headlines about scandal." Monica looked at him, her tone measured. "Headlines are already written. What matters is whether they tell a story of avoidance or of change." Anthony exhaled heavily and said nothing more. By the time the car pulled into the headquarters, reporters were clustered outside the glass facade, cameras flashing like lightning. Monica stepped out without hesitation, walking through the barrage with the composure of someone who knew every click of a shutter only amplified her authority. Rachel Moore followed at a distance, not required to be there but unwilling to leave. Mark Donovan lingered near the entrance, his expression tight, rehearsing the words he planned to use to defend himself. Inside, the boardroom gleamed with polished wood and chrome. The directors sat around the long table, their expressions guarded. At the head sat Chairwoman Eleanor Briggs, a woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for pragmatism. She wasted no time. "Ms. Ellis," she began, "we've been briefed about the events of your flight. The footage is spreading fast. We need to contain this before it damages the brand." Monica took her seat at the table. "Posture straight. Containment is not the goal," she replied. "Transformation is." A murmur rippled among the directors. One of them, a gray-suited man named Richard Calloway, leaned forward. With respect, this could be spun as an overreaction. "Passengers misinterpreted a service issue. Do you really want to escalate it into a culture war?" Monica's gaze was steady. It was not misinterpreted. It was lived. I was treated as though I didn't belong in a seat I had every right to occupy. That is not service. That is bias. And if it happened to me, imagine how many others with less power have endured it in silence. Rachel, seated quietly against the wall, felt her throat tighten. She wanted to speak, to confirm Monica's words, but shame held her tongue. Chairwoman Briggs tapped her pen against the table. "And what would you propose, Ms. Ellis?" "We can't simply fire half the staff to make a statement." Monica shook her head. "This isn't about mass firings. It's about accountability and reform. Training that is immersive, not performative. Complaint channels that are transparent, not buried. Leadership that reflects the diversity of our passengers. We have the opportunity to lead the industry, not trail behind it." Mark Donovan seized the pause to interject. "With all due respect, Madam Chair, I've worked with this airline for 2 decades. One incident shouldn't erase years of service. If I made mistakes, they were minor. To turn this into a crusade is unfair to the crew who give everything every day." Monica turned toward him, her expression calm. "Mark, what you call minor was my dignity, and the dignity of every passenger who has been dismissed because someone assumed they didn't belong. You weren't just tired. You weren't just careless. You made a choice to treat me differently. That is not minor. That is fundamental." The room stilled. Eleanor Briggs studied Monica closely, her pen now motionless. "You're asking us to accept disruption. That always comes with risk." Monica's reply was quiet, but every word carried weight. "The greater risk is to do nothing. Silence is not stability. It is decay. Every story like mine, every clip like Liam Tran's weakens us when we deny it. But if we lead with honesty, if we set a new standard, we turn scandal into strength." Liam's name echoed in Rachel's mind. She looked at Monica, realizing that this wasn't about protecting herself anymore. It was about telling the truth. She stood slowly, her hands trembling. "Madam Chair, Ms. Ellis is right." All eyes turned to her. Rachel's cheeks flushed, but she pressed on. "I was there. I served that cabin, and I failed. Not because I didn't know my job, but because I let my assumptions decide how I treated someone, I ignored her, I dismissed her, and I did it without thinking twice. Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself. If it can happen from me, it can happen from anyone. We need this change, Mark hissed. Rachel, sit down. But Eleanor raised her hand. Let her finish. Rachel's eyes brimmed, but she held steady. Ms. Ellis didn't humiliate us. She gave us a chance to see ourselves clearly. That's the chance the whole company needs. The silence that followed was profound. For once, Mark had no words. Eleanor leaned back, her gaze fixed on Monica. Finally, she nodded slowly. Very well. We'll authorize an emergency initiative. You'll have limited time to show results. Monica inclined her head. That's all I need. The results will speak for themselves. The meeting adjourned, the directors filing out, some wary, others thoughtful. Mark stormed away without looking back. Rachel lingered, her shoulders lighter than they had been all night. She approached Monica quietly. "Thank you," she whispered. Monica placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Don't thank me. Prove me right." Liam, waiting outside the boardroom with his phone in hand, caught sight of Monica's calm expression as she exited. He didn't film this moment. He simply stood there, in awe, knowing the story was no longer just about a flight. It was about the future of an airline, maybe even an industry. Life often gives us moments where our dignity is tested. This story reminds us that how we choose to respond can define not only the outcome, but also our legacy. Monica Ellis, treated as though she didn't belong, could have responded with anger or humiliation. Instead, she chose composure, letting the truth of who she was speak louder than any assumption. For older audiences, this resonates deeply because many have lived through times when respect wasn't given equally, whether due to race, class, or circumstance. The lesson is clear: silence can be powerful when it carries integrity. And dignity is not something anyone can take away from you without your permission. In daily life, when we encounter disrespect, whether from strangers, colleagues, or even loved ones, we can choose between reaction and reflection. Choosing dignity doesn't mean weakness. It means strength rooted in self-worth. It means setting a standard for others to follow. The broader truth. Real change happens not when we shout the loudest, but when we stand the firmest. Respect yourself, live with quiet strength, and you will leave behind a legacy that outlasts prejudice. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can hear these powerful lessons of dignity and justice. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us spread hope and change.